Hi, my name is Sandra Elford, and I'm a Foods and Nutrition Extension Associate in the Department of Agricultural and Human Sciences at NC State. Today, we are going to discuss food insecurity, emergency food assistance, and working with food pantries and food banks. We are going to start off with an overview of food insecurity, followed by a look at what types of food assistance programs are available for food insecure households. Finally, we will highlight why it's important to consider working with food banks and pantries in your communities. So what is food insecurity? To answer that, we need to look at what it means to be food secure. A food secure household has access at all times to enough food for an active, healthy life for all household members. On the flip side of that, a food insecure household is at times during the year uncertain of having or unable to acquire enough food to meet the needs of all household members. Food insecurity is broken into two categories, low and very low. Households with low food insecurity obtain enough food to avoid substantially disrupting their eating patterns or reducing food intake by using a variety of coping strategies, less varied diets, utilizing food assistance, and so on. While households with very low food insecurity have one or more household members whose normal eating patterns were disrupted and food intake was reduced at times during the year. Now that we've looked at the definitions, I'd like to talk about common misconceptions and other important things to keep in mind when talking about food insecurity. First off, food insecurity does not equal hunger. Hunger is a physical state of being and often conjures up images of extreme undernourished individuals. Rather, food insecurity relates to a household's confidence in and ability to access adequate food supplies for all household members to have an active and healthy life. Food insecurity is often not readily visible. Another common misconception is that food insecurity is a constant state. But food insecure households are not necessarily food insecure all the time. Food insecurity includes any and all occurrences within a household throughout a year. Finally, food insecurity is measured by the household level, not the individual level. Food insecure household members may experience varying degrees of personal food insecurity. It is also important to be aware of common coping strategies that food insecure households might utilize to deal with food insecurity. For some households, food insecurity may reflect the need to make trade-offs between important basic needs, such as housing or medical bills, and purchasing nutritionally adequate food. Similarly, some or all household members may skip or reduce meals to make food supplies stretch. As of 2015, 12.7% of U.S. households identified as food insecure. Of these, 7.7% had low food insecurity and 5% had very low. Food insecurity rates vary widely among different groups. When we look at food insecurity trends by race and ethnicity, we see that Hispanics, represented by the orange line, and non-Hispanic blacks, represented by the gray line, experience food insecurity at much higher rates than the national average of 12.7%. Conversely, food insecurity rates among the non-Hispanic whites are lower than the national average. Food insecurity is also more prevalent among households with children. 16.6% of households with children are food insecure, as opposed to 12.7% of all households. Among food insecure households with children, unmarried female-headed households have the highest rate of food insecurity at 30%. This is almost double the average food insecurity rate of all households with children, which is 16.6%. Food insecurity rates vary by state as well, with North Carolina falling above the national average. The overall food insecurity rate in North Carolina is 17.7%. The rates vary by county and community. This map illustrates food insecurity rates by county, with darker green indicating counties with greater food insecurity. Of households that are food insecure in North Carolina, approximately 26% do not qualify for federal food assistance programs such as SNAP and WIC. And this brings us to our next topic, types of food assistance. Now that we've looked at what food insecurity is and how often it occurs, I'd like to spend a little time discussing how food assistance programs work to address food insecurity. There are two main forms of food assistance in the United States: federal food assistance programs and emergency food assistance. Federal food assistance programs include WIC, SNAP, and the National School Lunch Program. Emergency food assistance includes food banks, pantries, and soup kitchens. Both forms of food assistance are important sources of food for food insecure households. Though federal food assistance programs provide the majority of food resources for poor families, emergency food assistance plays an important role for households that don't qualify for federal food assistance or whose assistance does not meet all the household food needs. In fact, the demand for emergency food assistance has greatly increased in the last 35 years. Since the 1980s, as federal support for poor families decreased, local agencies, including local food banks and food pantries, emerged to fill the gap. Although soup kitchens and food pantries existed in the U.S. before the 1980s, they were generally small in size and relatively few in number. The combination of the 1980s recession, steep cutbacks in federal social spending, and the increased visibility of the new poor contributed to increased demand for emergency food assistance. As such, food pantries and soup kitchens, which were originally intended as a stopgap emergency measure, have become a necessary and frequently used strategy to combat food insecurity for many households. Now that we know more about emergency food assistance, let's take a moment to review a few terms that are fairly common in food bank work. First, we have Feeding America, which is a nationwide network of 200 food banks and 60,000 food pantries and meal programs that provide food and services to people each year. Next, we have food bank and food pantry. Now, people often use the terms food bank and food pantry interchangeably. However, it's important to note that they both play different roles in distributing food to the community. A food bank is a distribution warehouse, often affiliated with Feeding America. Food banks provide a central location for the receiving of donated food and distribution of food and grocery products to local nonprofits in their communities. On the other hand, a food pantry is a community-based nonprofit food assistance program most often found at churches, synagogues, mosques, and social service agencies. Food pantries are places where those without food receive a supply of food to take home and prepare. Pantries often acquire a substantial portion of their food supplies from food banks. Food pantries are often largely volunteer run. A partner agency is the term used to describe the nonprofit program, such as a food pantry, or emergency food shelter or soup kitchen that gets food from the food bank or a food bank. And finally, a client is the term used to describe individuals who receive services offered at food pantries.
This diagram illustrates how Feeding America food banks and other partner agencies relate to each other, with Feeding America at the top as a national support network that serves 200 member food banks. These food banks, as well as other non-member food banks, serve as regional food distribution hubs to community partner agencies who provide emergency food assistance in the community, such as food pantries and soup kitchens.
In terms of numbers, Feeding America is a nationwide network of 200 food banks that serves 46,000 partner agencies, such as pantries or soup kitchens. Of these partner agencies, 51% rely entirely on volunteers and 62% are faith-based organizations. The Feeding America network serves 46.5 million people each year, or 1.7 people in the U.S. And who is using emergency food assistance? Emergency food assistance, such as food banks, food pantries, and soup kitchens, are most commonly used by working families, children, and individuals who are elderly, retired, or disabled. In the Feeding America network, 39% of client households have a child under age 18, and 33% of client households has a senior household member 60 years or older. So why should we consider working with food banks and pantries? As we've seen here, food banks and pantries are a vital community food source that serve a variety of ages and populations. We have learned from FNUT PAs in North Carolina who offer food pantry classes that these classes can be a great way to help pantry clients learn how to better use the food in their pantry boxes and learn important food resource management strategies that may help families become more food secure. Working with food banks and pantries can also help build community partnerships. They can serve as strong community partners to help expand your programming to the population that they serve and that you serve in your community. Now that I've highlighted a few key points about why it's important and worthwhile to work with food pantries, I wanted to close this presentation by challenging you to think about how working with food banks and pantries could benefit your community work. After this presentation, try to identify 1 to 2 additional reasons why working with food banks and pantries in your community could be beneficial to your programming and to your community. I hope you found this overview helpful and that it will encourage you to partner with food banks and food pantries in your community moving forward. It's been a pleasure to talk with you today, and I'm excited to hear about your work moving forward. So good luck moving forward with your work in food banks and food pantries.